The alien exploration vessel Xyrexus had seen strange things in its time. Collapsing stars, rogue black holes, and planets filled with carnivorous plants. But nothing could prepare Captain Ulzar and his crew for what they encountered on an uncharted moon, a human on vacation. The alien crew expected the worst. Their databases warned of humanity's reputation, survivors from a death world, conquerors of impossible odds, reckless beings with a habit of reshaping the laws of nature. Encountering one of them alone on a random planet, it had to be an omen of catastrophe. But something didn't add up. There was no battle armor, no weapons, and no sense of urgency. Instead, they found a human lounging under the twin suns, sipping from a glittering beverage, wearing sunglasses and holding a beach towel. This wasn't the ferocious species that the Galactic records had warned about. Yet as the crew of the Xyrexus soon discovered, even a human on vacation could turn the universe upside down, and with nothing more than a sense of curiosity and complete disregard for the rules of space exploration. "Why is it building a fire pit?" Ulzar whispered, horrified. "It's cooking something," his communications officer answered, clutching the emergency manual. They thought they were prepared for anything, but nothing in the galaxy could have prepared them for this. The exploration vessel Xyrexus glided through space, scanning the barren surface of an uncharted moon, orbiting a distant gas giant. Captain Ulzar sat at his command seat, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The mission was supposed to be routine, gather data, log planetary anomalies, and continue deeper into the sector. But as their sensors picked up something unexpected, the mission quickly turned into something far more ominous. "Captain," the sensor officer Galactic reported nervously, "there's something alive down there, one life form." Ulzar's 4 eyes narrowed. "Alone? On a moon with no atmosphere, toxic rivers, and a surface temperature capable of cooking metal?" He paused. "It must be some kind of local predator, perhaps a planetary parasite?" "No, sir." Galactic swallowed, his scales paling with dread. "It's a human." The entire command deck fell into stunned silence. Every crew member turned toward the captain, hoping it was some kind of error. A human, a member of the most feared species in the galaxy. The Deathworlders, survivors of a planet so hostile that even the most advanced civilizations avoided it. According to galactic databases, humans could survive in environments that would annihilate most other life forms. They were unpredictable, reckless, and far too curious for anyone's comfort. Encountering a human, alone, far from their home system, was not just unusual, it was terrifying. "I thought humans only traveled in groups," Ulzar murmured, unease prickling his exoskeleton. What could it possibly be doing out here, all by itself? The crew began exchanging rumors and hearsay about humanity, each tale more outrageous than the last. "I heard humans eat rocks," whispered a technician. "They have to. It's the only way they can digest that caffeine substance they're obsessed with." Another chimed in. "I read that humans can survive in the vacuum of space, without a suit." "They can?" asked Galactic, horrified. "How?" "Apparently they just hold their breath." Captain Ulzar silenced the murmurs with a wave of his clawed hand. "Enough. Whatever it's doing down there, we will observe from a safe distance. I want full shields up and all security protocols engaged." As the Xyrexus hovered above the moon's surface, the crew huddled around the primary view screen, anxious to glimpse this mysterious Deathworlder. When the image came into focus, their collective terror was replaced by confusion. The human was lying on a bright striped towel spread out over the cracked and dusty surface of the moon. 2 small reflective lenses covered its eyes, and it appeared to be basking under the twin suns. A large inflatable object floated lazily on a pool of toxic sludge nearby, with an Earth symbol, something called a flamingo, printed on it. "What is it doing?" Ulzar whispered. "It appears to be relaxing," Galactic reported, his voice a mix of confusion and terror. Another officer leaned closer to the screen. "Is it holding a beverage? What's in that container? Is it poisonous?" Ulzar squinted at the object in the human's hand. "I believe that's called a pina colada." The crew watched in stunned silence as the human casually stretched, letting out what appeared to be a satisfied sigh. A small drone hovered beside it, playing rhythmic Earth music, something ancient and tribal, with the lyrics, "If you like pina coladas," and getting caught in the rain. "Captain, this behavior is highly irregular," Gralvek muttered, scrolling frantically through the database. "There is no mention of humans traveling alone for leisure. They are supposed to be highly motivated creatures. This makes no sense." "Maybe it's scouting?" another officer suggested nervously. "For what?" Ulzar snapped. "This moon has nothing, no resources, no tactical significance. Just barren rock and poisonous lakes." The human, oblivious to the alien vessel floating above, began unpacking strange objects from a nearby container: a folded chair, a glowing orb labeled Earth Lantern, and a packet of something called marshmallows. As the crew watched in growing disbelief, the human constructed a small fire pit using the surrounding rocks and lit it with a small flame. "It's building a fire, what for?" Gralvek exclaimed. "The temperature on this moon exceeds 200 degrees during the day." I think it's roasting something," said the communications officer, horrified. The human impaled several marshmallows on a stick, holding them over the open flame with the precision of an apex predator. "Is this some kind of ritual?" a technician whispered. "What if it's a summoning rite?" "Or a territorial display," added another officer, "a warning to other creatures." The crew stood paralyzed by indecision, unsure whether to flee or intervene. Was this human preparing for something catastrophic? Or worse, was this just how humans entertained themselves? Ulzar rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a stress migraine, something no amount of tentacle tea could fix. "We need more data. Can we scan its vessel?" "We're already trying, sir," Gralvek replied. "But the human's equipment doesn't seem to run on normal power sources. It's solar-charged, but there are backup generators fueled by something called snacks." "Snacks?" Ulzar hissed in disbelief. "Yes, Captain." Gralvek pointed at the screen where the human was now enjoying a bag of brightly colored objects labeled gummy bears. Ulzar stared in silence, his exoskeleton itching with dread. The humans weren't just a threat because of their unpredictability. They were terrifying because they didn't even take survival seriously. Every action seemed to mock the very idea of danger. Where others would fear and prepare, humans improvised. Even here on a lifeless moon, this one was turning a barren wasteland into a vacation spot. "Sir," the comms officer interrupted urgently, "we have a new problem." "What now?" Ulzar groaned. "The human is waving at us." The entire bridge froze. On the view screen, the human had noticed the alien ship and was now standing up, grinning and waving enthusiastically. It didn't seem worried or scared. In fact, it appeared happy to see them. "What do we do?" Gralvek whispered. "Should we respond?" Ulzar's mandibles clattered anxiously. "No sudden movements. We don't want to provoke it." The human, meanwhile, had started making strange gestures, holding up its drink and pointing toward the flamingo float, as if inviting them to join. Ulzar slumped in his seat. "This is worse than we feared," he muttered. "It's trying to make friends." The human's behavior defied every galactic protocol. As the crew of the Zyrexus scrambled to interpret its bizarre actions, Captain Ulzar weighed his options. Ignoring the human was impossible. Attempting communication felt equally perilous. They had heard tales of how humans casually dismantled alien cultures just by being themselves. Yet the humans stood there, grinning broadly, waving like they were old friends. The air was thick with confusion and a growing sense of dread. "Sir, it's still waving," Gralvek reported nervously. "I think it wants us to come down." The bridge crew looked to Ulzar for guidance, their wide, nervous eyes begging for a solution. "What do we do?" "We can't risk contact," Ulzar hissed. "This is likely some form of psychological warfare." Before they could decide on a course of action, the human did something even more incomprehensible. It raised its wrist, tapped on a small device, something called a smartwatch, and spoke cheerfully into the air. "Hey guys, if anyone's listening, it's me, Chris. Just landed on, somewhere. You wouldn't believe the sunsets here. I think the Wi-Fi is out though. Anyway, see you soon." With that, the human chuckled, pocketed the device, and lay back down on the towel, as if communicating with an alien vessel in the sky was just another Tuesday afternoon activity. "What was that?" Gralvek whispered, horrified. Was it signaling reinforcements? Impossible to tell, Ulzar muttered, antennae twitching in distress. It seems unconcerned with its surroundings, almost as if, he paused, struggling to understand, as if it expects everything to be fine. Ulzar activated the database. What does the file say about this behavior? Are they always this casual? The crew scrolled frantically through pages of data. Gralvek cleared his throat awkwardly. According to the records, humans display this type of behavior under two conditions. 1, when they believe everything is perfectly safe, or 2, when they have absolutely no control over a catastrophic situation and have chosen not to care. Ulzar clicked his mandibles nervously. Which one do you think this is? Hard to say, Gralvek admitted. They're known to use sarcasm as a defense mechanism. So, it could either be preparing for disaster or genuinely enjoying itself? Correct, Captain. Gralvek sighed. And there's no way to know which. Ulzar leaned back, his claws tapping rhythmically on the console. This species is impossible to predict. Ulzar grumbled. Fine, we'll send a small probe down. Non-hostile, non-invasive. Just enough to gather more information. The probe launched from the belly of the Zyrexus, descending toward the moon's surface. The crew held their breath, watching anxiously as the human noticed the small, glowing device approaching. At first the human squinted in curiosity, then grinned even wider. Oh, a drone? Sweet, Chris exclaimed, waving at the probe. You guys are everywhere these days, huh? The probe beeped, scanning the human, and began transmitting readings back to the ship. Heart rate, steady. Body temperature, within normal parameters. Behavior, bizarrely nonchalant. Then the unexpected happened. Chris reached into his cooler, pulled out a cold drink, and placed it on top of the drone as if it were a coffee table. Hold this for me, buddy, the human said cheerfully, giving the drone a friendly pat, before wandering off toward the flamingo float. The bridge erupted into chaos. It used our technology, as furniture, an officer cried. Unbelievable, Gralvek muttered. They have no fear, none. Ulzar slammed a clawed fist on the console. This is worse than I thought. This human, it's not just surviving, it's thriving. Ulzar gathered the officers for an emergency meeting. We need to understand this human's intentions, he said, antennae twitching. It could be an advanced scout, perhaps preparing the way for an invasion. But sir, Gralvek hesitated, what if this is just normal behavior? The database does mention that humans occasionally relax to recover from something called burnout. Ulzar's mandibles clicked anxiously. What kind of creature needs to visit a barren moon to relax? The officers exchanged nervous glances. Humans are complicated, Gralvek said slowly. They create chaos, solve it, and then take breaks in the middle of nowhere. Maybe that's just how they cope with stress. Ulzar stared at the view screen, watching as Chris floated lazily on the toxic sludge pool, sipping his drink. This is not stress management, the captain muttered grimly. This is insanity. Against his better judgment, Ulzar ordered another scan of the area. We need to find out if it's hiding any advanced technology, something that explains its confidence. The sensors pinged back almost immediately. No hidden weapons, no emergency gear, just an assortment of absurd objects, sunglasses, inflatable toys, snacks, and an outdated Earth music player set to loop something called the Beach Boys. This makes no sense, Gralvek whispered. There's no survival equipment, no tactical gear, nothing that suggests preparation. Unless, Ulzar's eyes widened, unless humans are so dangerous that they don't need equipment. What if they're always prepared, even when they appear defenseless? The officers shuddered at the thought. So you're saying it's pretending to be relaxed just to lure us into a false sense of security? Ulzar nodded grimly. Exactly. We're dealing with a master of psychological warfare. As the meeting ended, the bridge crew returned to their posts, uneasy and more confused than ever. Ulzar stared at the screen, watching the human laugh and splash water onto the inflatable flamingo. I don't get it, Gralvek muttered quietly. How can something so relaxed be so dangerous? That, Ulzar whispered, is the real danger. At that moment, Chris sat up, stretched lazily, and noticed the alien ship once more. Without hesitation, he raised his drink in a cheerful toast toward the sky. Then, with a broad grin, he shouted, "Hey, you guys, want to join me?" Ulzar's heart sank. This wasn't just a terrifying encounter with a human. This was a social invitation. Despite their initial hesitation, Captain Ulzar knew they couldn't hover in indecision forever. Ignoring the human's presence might prove more dangerous than engaging. But as they scrambled to formulate a strategy, things went from confusing to catastrophic in the blink of an eye. The crew of the Xyrexus had hoped to keep their interaction minimal, observe, gather data, and leave without incident. But Chris, the human vacationer, had other ideas. As the alien ship drifted above, Chris stood up from his towel, stretched leisurely, and rummaged through his cooler again. He retrieved another object, this time a round, colorful sphere, and held it up toward the alien vessel, as if offering a gift. "Hey, catch!" Chris shouted, tossing the object into the air. The bridge erupted into chaos as the sensors locked onto the incoming projectile. "Captain, it's launched an unidentified device at us. Activate shields, evasive maneuvers." The crew braced as the object gently bounced off the ship's energy shield and landed harmlessly on the ground below. Galactic squinted at the view screen. "It appears to be some kind of earth fruit." "Fruit?" Ulzar hissed, bewildered. "Yes, Captain. Specifically, a watermelon." The alien officers stared in stunned silence as Chris waved enthusiastically from the surface. "It's just a snack. You guys seriously need to lighten up," the human called out cheerfully. "This has to be some kind of test," Ulzar muttered, rubbing his temples. "It's trying to gauge our response." As the tension mounted aboard the Xyrexus, the crew's attempts at establishing diplomatic contact only made things worse. The ship's translator struggled with Earth idioms, producing garbled messages that added to the confusion. "Greetings, human. We observe you with relaxation and non-aggression. Do not cast your fruits upon us," Chris laughed, clearly amused by the awkward translation. "You guys are hilarious. You should chill out and join me for some barbecue." Galactic's scales paled. "Captain, it's inviting us to participate in a ritual feast." Ulzar clicked his mandibles nervously. "That could be a trap." Galactic nodded. "It could also be an honor. We don't know." The crew debated furiously, torn between fear and curiosity. Was the human genuinely friendly, or was this part of some elaborate psychological game? Before they could reach a conclusion, things escalated again. While the crew panicked over diplomatic protocols, Chris set up a small portable grill next to the fire pit. He whistled a cheerful tune as he prepared something called hamburgers and hot dogs. The scent drifted through the atmosphere, confusing the alien sensors and triggering multiple alerts. "Captain, unknown chemical agents detected. Carbon compounds, volatile oils, possibly weaponized food." "Impossible," Ulzar muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced. "What is this human doing?" Galactic analyzed the readings, his voice trembling. "It appears to be cooking organic matter for consumption." The crew recoiled in horror. "Is this normal?" one of the officers whispered. Galactic nodded grimly. "Yes, humans refer to it as grilling. It's a recreational activity involving fire and charred animal flesh." Ulzar shuddered. "Monstrous." Just as the crew thought things couldn't get stranger, a sudden tremor rippled through the moon's surface. The toxic sludge pool nearby began to bubble ominously. "Captain, the geological activity is destabilizing," Galactic reported urgently. "We need to evacuate immediately." But before the Xyrexus could reposition, Chris noticed the bubbling sludge as well. To the crew's horror, the human didn't flee. Instead, he grabbed an inflatable pool toy, the flamingo, and plopped it into the middle of the toxic pool. "He's using the sludge as a hot tub," Galactic whispered in disbelief. Ulzar slumped in his chair. "We're witnessing madness, absolute madness." Chris, seemingly unbothered by the moon's geological instability, reclined on the inflatable flamingo, floating lazily on the toxic pool with a satisfied grin. The alien crew's instinct was to shut everything down, to evacuate, quarantine the area, and activate every safety protocol available. But Chris's carefree behavior threw them into complete disarray. "We need to issue an emergency protocol, full quarantine," Galactic urged. "There's no time," Ulzar barked. "If we retreat now, the human might follow us, and that could lead to disaster." While the crew argued, Chris casually solved the situation in the most reckless way imaginable. He reached over to his cooler, grabbed a random canister, and tossed it into the bubbling pool. With a loud pop, the sludge immediately stopped bubbling, settling back into a calm, murky surface. What just happened? Ulzar stammered. Galactic analyzed the data, his jaw slack with disbelief. It appears the human neutralized the toxic reaction with a beverage. Ulzar blinked. What kind of beverage? Galactic hesitated. Something called Diet Coke. The bridge fell silent as the realization sank in. The human had just prevented an environmental catastrophe, not through science or technology, but through sheer improvisation and dumb luck. Ulzar paced the bridge, his claws clicking against the metal floor. This is chaos, pure unfiltered chaos. How can a creature this reckless survive? Galactic shook his head, still stunned. Humans. They solve problems by ignoring the rules. It's as if they thrive on improvisation. Another officer chimed in nervously. Captain, we have a new problem. Ulzar groaned. What now? The human, it's inviting us down, again. On the view screen, Chris grinned and held up a plate of grilled food, waving enthusiastically toward the alien vessel. Come on down, guys, I've got burgers. They're out of this world. Ulzar buried his face in his claws. We're doomed. The situation was spiraling out of control. The crew couldn't retreat without risking diplomatic fallout. They couldn't engage without further provoking the human, and they couldn't ignore him, because ignoring a human was, apparently, just as dangerous as interacting with one. Every solution the crew proposed only created more problems. Alien bureaucracy clashed with human recklessness at every turn. Where the aliens wanted to follow strict protocols, the human broke every rule with cheerful disregard. He's about to light another fire, an officer reported anxiously. For what purpose? Ulzar demanded. I think it's to toast marshmallows, sir. Ulzar groaned. This is madness. As the tension reached its peak, the crew knew they had only one option left, accept the human's invitation, if only to prevent things from escalating further. Ulzar took a deep breath. Prepare a diplomatic envoy. We'll attempt to make contact. Galactic blinked. You mean go down there? To the surface? Yes, Ulzar muttered grimly. If we don't, this human might barbecue the entire moon. The crew braced themselves for what was to come, knowing that whatever happened next would be unlike anything they had ever experienced. The crew of the Zyrexus descended to the moon's surface with great hesitation. Alien protocol dictated caution, protective gear, emergency supplies, and an array of monitoring devices. Yet, despite all these precautions, they felt hopelessly unprepared. They were about to make direct contact with a human, a species known for surviving the impossible, and they had no idea what to expect. Chris greeted them with the same easy grin he had flashed at the ship earlier. He stood by the fire pit, flipping burgers with the care of someone with nothing to fear, completely oblivious to the tension among his alien guests. Hey, welcome, Chris called out, raising a soda can in salute. I wasn't sure if you guys would come, but I figured, why not set a couple extra plates, right? The aliens shuffled awkwardly in their protective suits, their eyes darting nervously around the campsite. This was not the first contact scenario they had imagined. The captain had prepared for hostility, ambushes, or intricate psychological games, not burgers on a grill. Ulzar stepped forward, cautiously extending one clawed hand in a gesture of formal greeting. Greetings, human. I am Captain Ulzar of the exploration vessel Zyrexus. We come in peace and mean no harm. Chris gave him a friendly slap on the shoulder, nearly causing the captain to collapse from shock. Peace, of course, man. I mean, I'm just here for a good time. No need to get all formal. The crew exchanged worried glances. The human's casual attitude was throwing them off their game. Where was the calculation? The strategy? How could this being be so comfortable? Galactic whispered nervously to the captain. Do you think it knows how dangerous this place is? Should we warn it about the toxic atmosphere and seismic instability? Before Ulzar could respond, Chris opened another soda can, sat down on the edge of the flamingo float, and grinned. You guys need to relax. This moon isn't so bad. Trust me, I've camped on way worse planets. Ulzar blinked. You camp on hostile worlds? Chris shrugged. Yeah, sure. Gotta make the most of things, right? Life's short. He took a long sip from his soda and smiled contentedly. Anyway, this moon's not even that dangerous. It's kind of peaceful, really. The aliens stared at him, their minds reeling. The idea that a human would willingly vacation on a toxic, unstable moon was incomprehensible. This must be a test, Ulzar whispered to himself. No creature could possibly enjoy this. As the aliens watched the human casually flip burgers and toast marshmallows, a terrible realization began to dawn on them. Humans didn't just survive chaos, they thrived in it. Where other species saw disaster, humans saw opportunity. Where others feared, humans found amusement. Gralvek leaned in closer to the captain, his scales pale with dread. Captain, what if humans aren't just reckless? What if they've evolved to embrace danger? Ulzar stared at the human, his antennae twitching. The thought chilled him to the core. What if the very traits that made humans seem insane were the same traits that made them unstoppable? What if the chaos they brought to the universe wasn't a byproduct of their nature, but the key to their survival? Ulzar's mind raced. The crew of the Zyrexus had spent their lives following strict protocols, relying on advanced systems to guide their every action. They believed that order and caution were the pillars of survival. But now, standing before them, was a creature that defied every principle they had ever known, a creature that thrived precisely because it ignored the rules. This changes everything, Ulzar muttered under his breath. Gralvek nodded grimly. If humans can turn dangerous worlds into playgrounds, what does that mean for the rest of us? Are we doing everything wrong? The weight of the question hung heavy in the air. For the first time in their lives, the crew of the Zyrexus felt something unfamiliar: doubt. As the aliens wrestled with their existential crisis, Chris, oblivious to the turmoil he had caused, handed Ulzar a grilled burger with a cheerful grin. Here, Captain, try one of these. They're out of this world. Ulzar hesitated, staring at the strange, charred food. Every instinct told him not to trust it, and yet something about the human's carefree attitude was oddly compelling. With great reluctance, Ulzar took a small bite. The flavors exploded across his senses, overwhelming him with a strange mix of pleasure and confusion. This is surprisingly good, he admitted. Chris beamed. Told you. You've got to enjoy the little things in life, Captain. Otherwise, what's the point? The captain stared at the human, feeling a strange mixture of awe and envy. How could a species that lived on the edge of chaos find joy so easily? Back aboard the Zyrexus, the officers gathered for an emergency meeting. The encounter with the human had shaken them to their core. Everything they thought they knew about survival, order, and safety was now in question. Captain, Gralvek began hesitantly, what if we've been too cautious? What if the reason humans thrive is because they accept the unpredictability of the universe? Ulzar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You mean we've been holding ourselves back, limiting our potential with too many rules? Gralvek nodded. Maybe there's something to learn from them. The room fell silent as the crew pondered the unsettling possibility. What if, instead of fearing chaos, they needed to embrace it? What if survival wasn't about avoiding danger, but learning to live alongside it? As the meeting concluded, Ulzar glanced back toward the view screen. The human was still lounging by the toxic pool, humming happily to himself. For the first time in his life, Ulzar didn't feel fear or confusion. Instead, he felt curiosity. Perhaps, he whispered, there is more to life than caution. The encounter with Chris had shattered the crew's confidence in everything they thought they knew. But just as the aliens began to grasp the strange, liberating philosophy of humans, things took an unexpected and dangerous turn. A sudden tremor rocked the ground beneath their feet. The toxic sludge pool rippled violently, and fissures snaked across the moon's surface, spewing jets of poisonous gas into the air. Captain, seismic activity is increasing exponentially, Gralvek shouted. The moon is destabilizing. We need to evacuate immediately. The crew scrambled into action, shouting commands and initiating safety protocols. But in the middle of the chaos, Chris remained perfectly calm, sitting cross-legged on the ground and sipping his soda. Relax, guys, Chris called out. These things happen all the time on vacation. You just gotta roll with it. The aliens gaped in disbelief. How could he be so relaxed in the face of imminent disaster? We must retreat, Gralvek insisted. The moon could collapse at any moment. Ulzar hesitated, torn between his instincts and the strange new perspective Chris had opened his mind to. The human, after all, had faced every absurd challenge on this toxic moon with reckless confidence, and somehow things always worked out for him. But retreating now would mean abandoning their only chance to understand the chaotic brilliance of humans. And perhaps, just perhaps, the human knew something they didn't. Hold your positions, Ulzar ordered, silencing the panicked officers. Let's see what the human does. Chris stood up, stretched, and inspected the cracks in the ground, as if he were evaluating a minor inconvenience. Then, to the crew's absolute horror, he pulled out a familiar object. Duct tape. No, this can't be happening, Gralvek whispered, his scales paling. Is he trying to fix an entire geological collapse? With duct tape? Chris crouched by one of the fissures and calmly began slapping strips of duct tape over it. This stuff fixes everything, he muttered to himself cheerfully. Moon fissures? No problem. The aliens stared in stunned silence as Chris applied duct tape to several other cracks, whistling a jaunty tune as the tremors began to subside. It's working, Gralvek whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. How is this even possible? Ulzar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Perhaps humans have evolved beyond the need for reason. The tremors eased, and for a brief moment, everything seemed under control. The crew of the Xyrexus exchanged relieved glances. Somehow, against all logic, the human had saved the day. But their relief was short-lived. As Chris gave the repaired fissures a satisfied pat, an ominous hum filled the air. The moon's magnetic field spiked, triggering an interdimensional anomaly, a shimmering portal tearing open in the sky. Oh, Chris muttered, sipping his drink. That's new. Captain, Gralvek cried, we've got an interdimensional breach. Reality is destabilizing. Ulzar slammed his fist on the console. Deploy containment protocols, now! The crew frantically worked to contain the anomaly, but their advanced systems were overwhelmed by the portal's chaotic energy. Strange creatures began to emerge, shimmering beasts from another dimension, writhing with alien geometries. The aliens panicked, but Chris, he just stood there, utterly unfazed. Looks like a typical Monday, Chris said with a shrug. He calmly reached into his bag, pulled out a pair of sunglasses, and slipped them on. The alien officers gawked in disbelief. How can he be so calm? Ulzar shook his head, marveling at the human's unflappable demeanor. Because to him this is normal. Captain, Gralvek whispered urgently, our systems can't stabilize the anomaly. It's too chaotic. Ulzar gritted his mandibles, feeling the crushing weight of hopelessness. But then, he glanced at Chris, who was now casually tossing marshmallows into the portal, as if feeding a cosmic pet. Wait a moment, Ulzar muttered, a wild idea forming in his mind. What if we stop trying to contain it and just go with the chaos? Gralvek blinked. Sir, that's insane. Exactly, Ulzar said with a determined grin, and right now insanity might be our only chance. Taking a deep breath, Ulzar turned to the human. Chris, do you have any more of that tape? Chris grinned. Plenty. Need a hand? The alien crew watched in disbelief as their captain, once a staunch believer in order and protocol, joined the human in his reckless improvisation. Together, they began using duct tape, snacks, and random objects to patch the anomaly, treating it like an uncooperative camping tent. Against all logic, the chaotic strategy started to work. The shimmering creatures retreated back into the portal, which slowly began to shrink. As the last remnants of the anomaly flickered out of existence, the moon stabilized. The crew of the Xyrexus stared at the calm landscape, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Chris clapped his hands together, grinning triumphantly. Well, that was fun. Who's up for s'mores? Ulzar shook his head in disbelief, but couldn't help a small, reluctant smile. I think I finally understand, he murmured. Gralvek stared at his captain in awe. Understand what, sir? That humans, Ulzar said, don't survive in spite of chaos. They survive because of it. The moon's surface was eerily quiet now, the threat of interdimensional chaos gone. The tremors had stopped, the anomaly had closed, and the alien crew of the Xyrexus stood in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible events they had just witnessed. Chris, meanwhile, was back to grilling, humming cheerfully as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He flipped the last burger with a casual flick of his wrist and gave the aliens a grin. "All right, guys, crisis averted. Now who's hungry?" Captain Ulzar watched the human with a strange sense of awe. Before today, he had believed that survival depended on strict adherence to protocol, caution, and logic. But everything Chris had done, every reckless, absurd, and nonsensical action, had somehow worked. For the first time in his life, Ulzar saw the universe in a new light. It wasn't just about avoiding danger or maintaining order. Sometimes survival meant diving headfirst into chaos and figuring things out along the way. "We were wrong about them," Ulzar whispered. "Humans. They aren't just reckless. They're adaptable in ways we can't even comprehend." Galactic nodded slowly, still trying to wrap his mind around it. "They don't follow rules, because they don't need them. They create their own solutions as they go." Ulzar glanced at the human, who was now roasting marshmallows with a goofy smile. "And they seem happy doing it." Chris walked over with a plate of food, handing it to Ulzar and Galactic without hesitation. "Here you go. I know it's not fancy, but it's made with love and duct tape." He gave them a playful wink. Ulzar stared at the plate, his mandibles clicking softly in contemplation. The burger was a small gesture, but it represented something far bigger, a connection, a glimpse of what it meant to be human. Galactic hesitated, then took a cautious bite. His eyes widened in surprise. "It's not bad," he admitted. Chris laughed, clapping him on the back. "See, told you, you guys need to loosen up a bit. Life's too short to stress about everything." For a brief moment, the tension between the species melted away, replaced by something far more profound: friendship. The aliens weren't just surviving this encounter, they were learning from it. As the aliens enjoyed their first taste of human food, Ulzar felt a pang of sadness. This strange, reckless species had challenged everything he believed about the universe, and in doing so, had changed him. But their time together was coming to an end. The Xyrexus had to return to its mission, and Chris had other places to explore. "I suppose we'll be leaving soon," Ulzar said quietly, "but I won't forget this encounter." Chris smiled warmly. "Hey, if you guys ever need me, just swing by Earth. I'll show you the really fun places." Ulzar chuckled, a rare sound for the normally stoic captain. "I think I'd like that." The crew of the Xyrexus began packing up their equipment, still marveling at the events of the day. They had encountered a human in the most unexpected of circumstances, and walked away not only alive but changed. As the ship's engines roared to life, Ulzar looked back one last time. Chris stood by his campfire, waving with that same carefree grin that had baffled them from the start. "Good luck out there," Chris called out, "and remember, if all else fails, just grab some duct tape and roll with it." Ulzar smiled, giving the human a respectful nod. "We'll try," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. As the Xyrexus lifted off, Galactic turned to the captain with a thoughtful expression. "Sir, do you think we'll ever understand humans?" Ulzar chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, and that's their greatest strength." The ship soared into the sky, leaving Chris and his bizarre campsite behind. But the aliens knew that things would never be the same. They had seen a glimpse of the impossible, and they were better for it. Just as the ship entered orbit, a new alert appeared on the console. Galactic frowned, checking the readings. "Sir, it seems our landing gear is malfunctioning." Ulzar sighed, rubbing his temples. "What now?" Galactic hesitated, then grimaced. Apparently, the landing stabilizer was patched with duct tape. Ulzar stared at the console for a long moment, then burst into laughter, something his crew had never heard before. "That human, he really is something else." Galactic blinked in confusion. "Should we replace the duct tape?" Ulzar grinned. "No, leave it. I think it'll hold." As the Xyrexus disappeared into the stars, Ulzar felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The universe was chaotic and unpredictable, but perhaps With a little duct tape and a lot of improvisation, anything was possible. And somewhere, on a toxic moon far below, a human toasted marshmallows by the fire, blissfully unaware that he had just changed the fate of an entire alien crew. Months had passed since the encounter on the toxic moon, but the crew of the Zyrexus was still coming to terms with what they had experienced. The human, Chris, had left a lasting impact, not just on their individual lives, but on their understanding of the universe itself. In the grand halls of the Galactic Research Council, Captain Ulzar stood before an assembly of alien scholars. His mandibles clicked softly as he presented the final report of their encounter with the human. The subject displayed a complete disregard for protocol, safety, and logic, Ulzar began solemnly. The council members leaned forward, expecting grim warnings. And yet, Ulzar continued, his tone softening, despite the apparent madness, the subject achieved what our most advanced systems could not. With nothing more than optimism, ingenuity, and duct tape, the human neutralized multiple crises and left our crew profoundly changed. The council buzzed with confused murmurs, unsure how to interpret this. Therefore, Ulzar concluded, I recommend a new amendment to the Galactic Crisis Manual. In the event of catastrophic failure, our best course of action may be to contact a human. The room fell silent for a moment, then exploded into incredulous whispers. A human? One council member exclaimed, scandalized. You can't be serious. Ulzar gave a knowing smile. Oh, I'm quite serious. If the universe ever falls apart, it'll be the humans who hold it together, with duct tape. Back on the Zyrexus, Galactic was hard at work updating the ship's safety protocols. But this time, the manuals contained some rather unorthodox additions. Galactic squinted at the new section. In the event of emergency, attempt duct tape solutions before engaging full system shutdown. He sighed and shook his head. We're doomed. Ulzar chuckled from the captain's seat. Maybe, but I have a feeling it'll hold. Meanwhile, on Earth, Chris had returned from his vacation with a sunburn, a cooler full of leftover snacks, and stories no one believed. He sat at a beachside bar, sipping a drink, blissfully unaware that an entire alien civilization had restructured their crisis protocols based on his antics. A familiar voice chimed from his smartwatch. Hey, Chris, how was your trip? Chris grinned. It was wild. Met some cool aliens. Saved a moon. You know, same old, same old. His friend laughed on the other end. Yeah, sure you did. Chris chuckled to himself, knowing that somewhere out there, an alien crew would never look at the universe the same way again. Back on the Zyrexus, Ulzar sat quietly in the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. He thought of the human, how without effort or intention, Chris had taught them all a valuable lesson, that chaos was not the enemy, but a fact of life, and that sometimes the only way to survive was to laugh, improvise, and slap some duct tape on the cracks. Ulzar smiled to himself. The universe was still a dangerous place, but thanks to that strange human on vacation, it felt just a little bit more manageable. Months later, the Galactic Research Council's new manual included a curious footnote. If all else fails, contact a human. And deep in an undisclosed lab, alien scientists were hard at work, trying to decipher the greatest mystery of all. How did duct tape fix a moon?